Welcome to the Collective Perspective. Truth, expression, community, and Black Lives Matter. We at the Collective Perspective are not impartial or on the fence about Black Lives Matter. We unequivocally support Black Lives Matter in our actions, our thinking, and in our spirit. Your experience with race and privilege, with Isaac J. Connor, an actor, director, and producer based in the New York City area, Celine Yohamus, a drummer, percussionist, and educator in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Mia Medeiros, a painter, photographer, and graphic designer in the San Francisco Bay Area, Tori Lee, an actor, author, dancer, and educator in the San Francisco Bay Area, Daniel Bartholomew-Poyser, a musician, conductor, and educator in Toronto, Alberta, Canada, Christopher Rayshun Marshall, an actor, writer, and director in the New York City area, Shimon Foy, a family man, screenwriter, director, and producer in the New York City area, and Tamara Foy, a family woman and owner of Mom's Love, Inc., also in the New York City area.
My name is Shimon Foy. I was thinking about this too. One of my first experiences with racism, I'm sure there were probably others, but the first one that really comes to mind, I was from a place called Elizabeth, New Jersey. And anybody that knows New Jersey knows that that is pretty urban, and it's primarily African American and Hispanic. So I actually moved to the next town over that was a little more mixed. So then my cousins moved from Elizabeth to Colonia, New Jersey, which is even a little further south, and it's pretty much like at that time in the 80s it was an all white community. So I said I want to see your house, and we were in Linden, and we all had a bike. So I said, let's ride our bikes to Colonia. So we rode our bikes. It was very, very far. And once we got into Colonia, which is pretty much almost Colonia, we were in a place called Rawway that was a white, pretty much all white community. These guys, and I was probably about 11 or 12. These guys said, this guy came out of the house and he said, I don't know if we're supposed to use words or curse or anything, but he said, you N-word to all of us, and there was about 3 of us riding on our bikes. And then he said, and then I heard gunshots. So we don't know if he was slamming the door. We don't know whatever. But the way that we interpreted things is he was yelling the N-word to us. And then we heard gunshots and we just rode our bikes as fast as we could. Now, I'm sure there were other instances way before I was 12, but that stood out because I felt really unsafe. And I was like, man, this is, crazy. I didn't know how to expect it. So that's just a little bit. I don't want to take too much time. I'll let someone else share their experiences and share who they are.
A real quick question though. How old were you at the time?
I was maybe about 11 or 12, I want to say.
So you and I are roughly the same age. So this was in the 80s?
Oh, this was
90s?
in the 80s. Yeah, this was in the 80s. And so well over 30 years ago. And this was in like Middlesex County, New Jersey. And Colonia is one of the richest towns in Jersey, I believe. Even Lucille Ball used to live there. So it's a lot of affluent people. And if there are a couple of blacks, but they're all like segregated. So on my way to there is where I had this experience. And that was pretty scary.
My name is Daniel Bartholomew-Poyser, and I'm currently the principal education conductor and community ambassador for the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. And I'm also the artist in residence and community ambassador for the Symphony Nova Scotia in Halifax. So I spend my time between those 2 positions, and then freelancing with San Francisco Symphony and most recently Washington National Opera. So I'm basically a freelance conductor. In addition, for 10 years before that, I was a public school teacher. I was a public school teacher, but at a private school. And now I also am a public school teacher as well too. So I've done a lot of that sort of work. That's who I am. That's what I do. And lately, it's been a lot of consulting and talking with people and helping people craft statements with regards to the arts and Black Lives Matter. The first incident of racism that I can remember, I don't know if this is, well, I'll say 2. The first incident of race stuff that I can remember actually came from me. I was 4 years old or so, and my mom had taken me to a babysitter. And I remember my mom taking me to the house of this new babysitter, and they said, where's the guy? And he came out and he walked across the veranda, and I looked up and said, "You're white," because I'd never encountered white people before, like to be taken care of, or like to have like a white person in a shirt. So I don't know how he felt about that. Maybe we can look him up and see his reaction. But I was 4 and he was 18 or 20 or whatever. So that was one of my first memories of. That's actually my first memory of encountering difference. It's fun. He's a great babysitter. This is Montreal, 1982. And then 1983, 84 or so, we moved to Calgary. Same kind of story. Moving to it was an all-white neighborhood, come on. And we're the only Black family there. And within 2 days, the first thing that happened was I went to the park. I remember sitting in the park on my bike, and a bunch of kids came around me, and I was circled by them, and they were like, "Hey, N-word," and they spat on me and all this sort of stuff. And basic learned racism of 10, 11-year-olds. Like, we say the N-word, we spit on them. There was no physical violence, but I mean, I guess spitting is physical violence. So yeah. And I was able to escape, talk my way out of it and make laughs sheepishly. And then I didn't really play outside. I was scared to go outside for the next 4 or 5 years. And that's not an exaggeration. I didn't really play outside or go outside because I was afraid that they would find me or catch me. But at the end of that period, the bully, the main one, I don't know if he found education or religion, whichever one he found, he actually came back to me and apologized. And I got on my bike to try and, I said, "Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. Ha ha ha." Try to get on my bike and go away. And I fell off my bike, and he actually helped me up and walked me home. He was, considered older and bigger. So those were some of my experiences, my initial experiences of race. Definitely in terms of my life as a kid, the first one that really that characterized my life in that neighborhood was that one, because I just didn't go outside very much. I stayed with very safe friends, but I was dangerous. But yeah, that's who I am. That's my first experience with racism and a bit about who I am.
Hi everybody, my name is Christopher Ration Marshall. I live in Brooklyn, and I'm originally from Mississippi. I am an actor, a writer, a director. I also created this program that I do in partnership with a subsidiary company that's connected to the DOE, where I teach children with autism how to improve their reading and writing by using Shakespeare. And as far as my first experiences with racism, the first thing that I remember is growing up in Mississippi. I'm actually mostly a majority Native American. And so the first incident I had was being a Black or dark-skinned Native American around a bunch of Black or African-American children, and being proud of that Native American culture that I go home to every day, and then going to school and telling them that I'm Native American, and then their response is, "You ain't Indian, you Black. You ain't Indian, you were N-word," stuff like that, from my own people, because they assume that just because you're a certain skin color, in order to be Native American, you have to be like really, really light skinned, with pretty hair and pretty eyes and stuff like that. It almost created an erasure of my own culture, that I had pretended to not be a part of my own culture and just be a part of the African Black culture. Do you know what I mean? But my biggest, there's been little, like in high school, I had a principal who told me, because I was in the top 10, and I got bumped back to number 14 in my class, but he came to me and said, "I will quit my job and become a priest before I ever let a Black person graduate in the top 10 of his class." The first time I've dealt with blatant, just in-your-face racism was when I moved to New York. In a 3-day period, I had 3 white people in 3 different situations call me the N-word. And this was in New York. A woman, I was training with my martial arts group in Central Park. I was sparring with this white guy, and a woman yells across the park, "Stop being so aggressive, you effing N-word." And then the next day I got on the train, on the 8 train. White guy was sitting in the middle seat, and I asked to sit down, and he didn't move, so I sat down anyway. And he had scooted over to the other seat and stared at me for 3 stops, and then when he got off, he said, "You stupid N-word," and then walked off the train. And then the very next day, I got on the 3 train, and I sat down by a white guy. Didn't think anything of it. He looks across the train to the other white people and said, "Who told the N-word that he can sit beside me?" Those happened 3 days in a row in New York City in 2016.
Hi, everybody. Tamara, New York. I was just taken back by what everybody has shared so far. I mean, I feel like, I've had experiences, but nothing to that level. And, I'm just really sorry that, the men on this call have experienced those things like at such young ages and just continuously. It's terrible. I guess my earliest experience with racism, I was in, my family was, it seemed like one of the first bunch of Black families to kind of like start going to the Poconos back in the really early 80s, Pocono resorts and stuff. And at the time, it's like we would be the only Black family around, it seemed. And just really quickly, I remember my sister, she was a baby, so I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. And my mother went to put her in the pool. I think it was at the Shawnee Resort. And everybody jumped out of the pool when my infant sister got into the pool. And I couldn't believe it. The whole place cleared out. Sorry about the noise. No one said anything in particular, but I guess that was my first experience. And then I've had little things here and there, like throughout my years. I might be swimming somewhere, and I remember recently actually someone said, "Oh, it looks like a dog's in the pool." Yeah. So I'm just trying to think of other things. And then I guess this wasn't necessarily so bad, but it did stand out. I have 3 kids, and we got stuck in Tampa without a nanny. Our nanny kind of bailed on us. We were at a wedding and we needed someone to watch the kids. Anyway, the bride found someone at the last minute, but she didn't feel like she had to say, well, these are Black kids that you're going to be watching. And we didn't know what the nanny looked like. It didn't really matter. We just wanted somebody that was going to take care of the kids. And when the nanny arrived, similar to the gentleman's story, it was a white woman, and she just kind of like looked so shocked to see the kids. And we were like, okay, we'll see how this works out. And, at the end, when we went back to get the kids and everything, she's like, oh my God, they were such lovely children. I was like, you thought that they would be different, but it was her kind of first experience, it seemed like, taking care of Black children. So yeah, that's it.
A lot of wheels turning whenever I hear people's stories. I'm assuming it's the same for you all as well. Whether you can identify with it or not, it's always pretty unsettling. One of the things that really that kind of stood out to me was when Daniel was sharing how the racism came from you initially, one of your first experiences. And because so many things are being brought up on a daily basis right now with our continuing protests, and the way I see it, our continuing evolution of revolution is every day new things are going to come to light. And there were topics that were kind of left off last week because we ran out of time and we saved them for this week. So I'll bring those up as well. But the one thing that Daniel said that made me think about this was there was something posted recently, and maybe Mia, this is what you shared, I don't remember, but it was about reverse racism. But when I first heard the term reverse racism, I remember thinking, well, that's a little horseshit, because there are a lot of words that are kind of like the soft backhanded racism that people can use without realizing how racist they are, like wigger. That gets used all the time and very innocuously, like, no, just a white guy that kind of, has the Black culture, is maybe a rapper or something. How did you put that word together? There were 2 words that made you put that word together, and I'm pretty sure most of us aren't comfortable with them, So that's one thing. But the other thing is just that there's racism or there's not. So like, if you're Black and you have a problem with me because I'm white, whether I think it's justified or not, that is racism. So like, I remember there was a guy that got involved with my burlesque troupe. He was doing the sound for me. So whenever I had big things, he was always the guy helping me. And he did a decent job. And I remember one of the promotional events, we're all chilling after the event, drinking, and everybody's so happy that this thing is happening. And I remember he said to me, man, this is really educational for me, because until I met you, like, I just kind of assumed all white people were rich. And I remember like, it was such a weird thing. Like something crazy flew in my ear, you know, like that I just instinctively said like, you racist mother. And so it began, we began to have a good conversation because of it. And so I'm just saying, with regard to the term reverse racism, that's such a racist idea that like white people can be racist. But if you have that same problem back, no. We're the racist. You're reversing it. You're trying to have what we have. That's my take on it. I'll start with Daniel because you're the one that kind of made me think about it, but what are your thoughts on reverse racism and wigger and these kind of soft, backhanded racist remarks?
Well, speaking specifically to the term wigger that you used, I mean, that, like you said, it's like there are two words that are part of that. So if structurally the racism depends upon, the reverse racism depends on the initial racism, which is the N-word, then I think, yeah, we can see why it's still offensive. But it's not just like, you know, it's not just a question of words, it's also a question of power. So there have been times when the only means of, not retribution, but the only means of equalization have been a struggle. And it's a 400-year struggle that's been going on in terms of like Black and white issues in North America, right? So reverse racism, that's pretty rich. That's pretty rich when the knee has been on the throat of a people group for 400 years and still has been as of March 25th. So yeah, I think somebody could say, yeah, like a Black person saying X, Y, Z, you're using reverse racism, but then they also need to look at like the reasons why that's happening at a much bigger like at a macro level. And when you look at it like that, it's like, yeah, it kind of, there's a reason why, because what means are there of protest, legitimate protest that people can enact against the power that, you know, controls most of the means of communication in the discourse. So
I have a comment, if you don't mind. So my first run-in with racism was when I was 3 years old. And I feel like we need to really think about the definition of what is race. Like, race is not a skin color. Race is a group of people who are culturally alike, socially alike, who share the same values, same ethics, sometimes same features, but race is more overarching than just skin color. So when I experienced it, it was in Germany, these two little kids on the playground pinned me down. One of them threw a rock on my head, like a massive rock, dropped it on my head, cussing at me in German because I was American. And the second time when I was like, I think 4 or 5, maybe 6, it was like kindergarten, and, you know, we used to throw snowballs at the German guards and they would cuss at us in German and something along the lines of, you stupid American girl. And they would shove their rifles with the bayonets on the end through the barbed wire fence, you know, yelling at us, and we would giggle and run away. But I remember as a child thinking, this isn't right. This is somebody being prejudiced towards me because I'm American. And so I think racism, a lot of my frustration recently is with people's definition of being a racist and race. I think we're forgetting what the overarching truth of it is. And I'm going to read you guys something really quickly that really pissed me off recently. Isaac, I sent it to you the other day. And this woman posts, reminder, and she's white, that racism is prejudice plus power. Therefore, you cannot be racist towards white people because white people have always had control in this country. That's not to say white people can't experience prejudice or stereotyping, just that reverse racism is a myth. Okay, carry on, little heart. So I wrote to the effect of, this is bullshit, because I don't think that that's correct at all. I think racism has nothing to do with power as a culture, right? As a society. I have personally seen Black on white racism and the opposite. So, I mean, and not just somebody calling somebody a name, being prejudiced, but like true violence. And so for me, I know for a fact that it's there, but no matter what I told these women, they were like adamant, they didn't want to hear it. And it was, so I had to like bow out, you know? So what do you guys think about that? Because that really got under my skin.
I think I would say it is also about power. I think that's an important thing for me, I think, in terms of like a people that have been, that have been put down. I think that's an important factor in it. But at the same time, yeah, you are right. Racism against another race is not going to solve the problem. But I think power is an important aspect to look at in it. I don't know.
I think power can be in it, but I don't think it's reliant on power. I don't think that you
yes,
can't have racism without power, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard the same statement that you've made several times, and I have and have not agreed with it in different scenarios. When you look at the definition of racism, at least the Oxford English and the Merriam-Webster definition, it is discrimination against people based on race or ethnic group. I think the issue is in the weaponization of that racism. As a Black man, I know that I'm raised to believe that when I encounter white people, expect racism. And if you don't get the racism, then great. That's a great situation that you're in. You found a white person who's not being racist towards you. There's a lot of things that we can go and say, oh, well, yes, saying wigger is a racist term. But at the same time, I think that, and this is an excuse, but I think that a lot of the names that have come up have been made up about, like, for example, white people like Punky and Cracker and Wigger and all these other names have been, in a way, sort of a reaction. Because before any of those names came up, the N-word has been used by white people to describe Black people for hundreds of years.
So I told her that. I said, I understand that Black people have a better excuse, for lack of a better term, to be upset with white people. And so there's like, it's almost more justified in my opinion, but still it doesn't make it right? Like anything violent or mean is not right in my eyes. But there is a little bit more justification because of the history that goes behind it. And I said, I think it has to do with more of like a superiority complex. Like you think that you're above somebody and therefore you're going to hate on them. That to me is more racism than the whole power behind it.
In history, we have seen with the police now, with the politicians, with plantation owners, we've seen a history of repeated violence where Black people have lost their lives because of their skin color. Yeah. Because they didn't have the power to fight back against white people who did have power. And so think about when you're bullied, when you've been bullied. Like you mentioned about the situation with the children who were beating you on with the rock. How did you feel in that situation?
Well, I felt the prejudice, right? And I also have been, the opposite situation of you in predominantly Black schools, which I shared in our last call, and, pinned to the ground again by Black girls saying they hated my kind. I was a cracker. Don't ever look at them. Like, don't even look in their direction or they're going to beat the shit out of me. And I remember my dad, had enough, and he yanked me out of the school, literally threw me over his shoulder, went to the girl who was bullying me, said something really mean. I don't remember what it was. I just remember she burst into tears, and we left. And so then I went to like an all-white school, and then I went back to an all-Black school, almost all-Black school, which there was a ton of violence. And that's where I started really seeing it more frequently. And they segregated the lunchroom, just like you said. There was like this tiny little cluster of white people who were scared. And then there was like everybody else that was Black, beating on the tables and having fun and feeling good. And so I was like, I want that. Like, I want to be not a wigger, because the wiggers were different than the white girls who got in with the Blacks, but I wanted to be in on that because I was curious. And we talked about that curiosity last time too, Isaac and Celine, about how that curiosity is a good way to help bridge that gap. But I think, instead of sitting there in fear and sitting there upset about all that bullying that I had encountered personally, I was like, how can I turn this around? How can I be on their side? Like, how can I make their culture part of my own? And I fell in love with it. Like, I fell in love with the culture. And I just had an African fashion class, for my art studio. I love it. I love so many things about it, and I wish other people could see it from a curiosity standpoint, that it has nothing to do with power. I think that's something where we've really gotten off track. as whites, like our privilege has become what they think to be power. And it's not. It's like an illusion, right? I mean, it kind of is and it isn't. Like, it shouldn't be. I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say here. It's like, is anyone feeling what I'm putting down here? It's like,
yeah, I see what you're saying. I feel like on the opposite side too, like essentially what you're saying. I find things that bother me was when I was teaching high school. I was doing a musical and I was going to do a hip hop version of the musical. I went online and typed in hip hop dances or hip hop dancers. And when I clicked on images, all I saw were basically white people in urban, like hip hop clothes. When I clicked on videos of hip hop dances, all I saw was white people in hip hop clothes. I didn't see one black person when I typed in hip hop dancing. I saw there were some Asians as well, but it was predominantly white people doing hip hop dance. I kept looking. I went down a rabbit hole and kept searching different things. When I typed in black people dancing, they showed a bunch of, for lack of a better word, project looking women with like really like their hair kind of short, nappy hair, not combed, wearing really fat, but wearing like spaghetti strap shirts or just like the bra halter top kind of shirts and really short shorts that kind of went in their ass and everything. And they just looked very nasty and disgusting. And this was when you typed in black women dancing. And so that, for me, became really a form of internet racism. That's just where it's like, okay, when you type in hip hop dancing, a dance that was created by our culture, all you see are white people doing.
There are three different things that this part of the conversation made me think of. One is representation versus appropriation. And one is, I want to share something. The title is Cracka. And we were talking about some of these words that, and whether they have the same kind of power, which I don't feel they do, as some of the disparaging words against black people.
Hey, how's it going? Why don't you step out? Take that shit off your head, monkey!
Sure that black monkey would you are!
Mother Earth, make sure I get my nut. And if she bleeds gold, they should crown me King Tut. Nat King Cole, King Solomon, these nuts. Patricia fucking oil, you get rich when I bust. I'm starting to get dizzy. I made that bitch squirt and created the Mississippi River. My nigga took a trip to nigga.
What you looking at, Cracka?
What's your name, Cracka? Michael. Well, you know names. Where I come from, this isn't the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, you are, Cracka.
Welcome back. Be cool.
So again, this is called Cracka. It's not out yet. There are always, no matter, you could post a picture of bunnies like chewing on flowers and nothing but rainbows and lollipops, and somebody would dislike it. So this particular trailer has just over 1 million views. 28,000 people have liked it. 37,000 people have disliked it. Normally, your dislikes are a small fraction, unless you've really made crappy art and you're trying to share it with people. I have two reactions to that. One is you have to watch the trailer to see, and that is part of the trailer shows a bumper sticker that says Trump 2020. So you're going to get those fascists that are just, well, you said something about Trump, it's derogatory, so screw you. And that's probably a big part of it, to be fair. But the main thing, though, is that this is what looks to be a much more challenging take on a really, really bad 90s film that had a good heart and some good acting, but like poor execution. And it was called White Man's Burden, I don't know if you all are familiar with that. So it has Henry Belafonte was playing the wealthy, affluent patriarch of this family, and then John Travolta plays the poor white man, and there's a whole speech with Harry Belafonte saying we are the superior race. So basically they flipped it, and it was a good film to make, just kind of poor execution. This seems to be hitting the nail right on the head. I'm hoping that it does anyway. So that's unsettling for white people, I think, is why it has so many dislikes. And so I think part of the internet thing that Mia was talking about is not so much about marketing. It's just that the people who are sharing stuff are inherently racist.
Hey, there's also, things have been revealed in the different social media platforms that it is purposely done. TikTok, for example, a report was recently released that similar dances like the Renegade, like they'll have, if it's a white person that's doing it, they'll make sure that actually trend, like that more people have access to it than if it's a Black person. And apparently this is something that's been done for a very long time, and we're all just kind of becoming aware of it.
Yeah. A video that has gone viral is there's this young white lady who wrote a speech basically because she heard two other white people speak and didn't like what they said.
Hi, I'm Riley Calloway, and I'm here in support of the ordinance representing Stand United. I did not come here to speak, but after hearing what Karen here behind me said, I needed to speak up. She's upset because her officer husband is being cussed at and supposedly followed and spit on, but I just want to point out that people who are Black have had to endure all of that and brutality at the hands of the people who are supposed to protect them for over 400 years, which is why we are here to protest in the first place. So I am sorry that in the last 10 days you have felt just a little bit uncomfy, but I hope that you can understand that you've now had a fraction of a taste of it. And if you've got any empathy in that little blue heart of yours, then I suggest that you start looking at this from the other side, the morally, legally, and ethically correct side. It is not a blue life, it is a blue shirt. Another Karen earlier said if someone broke the law, then they should be arrested. Okay, so then let's arrest the police who said screw everything that they learned in their supposed max of 6 months of training, and let's arrest the police who turn off their cameras. Let's arrest the police who use violence against people on the opposing side just to prove an invalid made-up point. If someone broke the law, they should be arrested. So let's arrest them. Someone here said that we are not against you, we just want you to do what you swore to do, which is protect and serve. So why are we protecting ourselves against you? If you are more concerned about protecting property rather than law-abiding citizens, then you are the problem. We show up in t-shirts and holding signs, but the officers and military are showing up locked and loaded with bulletproof shields to protect them against what? Paper cuts? After a probable maximum of 6 months of training, you can't handle someone yelling facts in your face? At this point, the opposers know what the right decision is. Karen, you were not at the protest. We were. We saw what happened with our own eyes. You watched the news. That is the difference. We are speaking on experience, and you are speaking out of willful ignorance. But enough about her. I am really here to tell all of you to vote yes, because the wall behind you says, let honor, truth, and justice rule within these walls, and I hope that you abide by that. Thank you.
She didn't say anything that Black people haven't been saying for years. This is what Fred Hampton and Huey Newton and Bobby Seale and all of our predecessors of the Black Power movement were basically saying, and they got assassinated for saying. They all got assassinated around the same time. Well, not Bobby Seale, but they all got assassinated around the same time for saying just these things. They became enemies of the FBI, enemies of the state, because they were trying to ask for equality for Black people. Martin Luther King assassinated for speaking out. Essentially, he was okay whenever he was just speaking about peace, but close to the end, he started getting a little militant as well about how we need to defend ourselves. And then all of a sudden, he gets shot right after, like a few months after he makes his self-defense speech. And I think that the reason why things are getting done about it now is because white people are stepping up and speaking up now.
I think that just goes into like the power. People have been saying this for years. I had a conversation with my my coworker, who's a white woman, and we're talking about it. I work for government, and it's becoming a big discussion within work. And You know, it just seems like the more white voices, the more it's taken seriously. And on one hand, I'm like, you know, whatever way works. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, wow, this is really showing an example of what, you know, us as Black people have been talking about for centuries, you know, that there's white privilege. I have my daughter next to me. She's 12. She's like, white privilege? I did want to comment though really quickly. Is it Mia or Maya?
Mia.
Mia. I understand what you were trying to say, and I kind of struck as far as like racism and power and everything, and I kind of struggle with it because I think that, you know, any way you slice it, it feels terrible. Whether the person's, but I do agree that there's prejudice, there's bigotry, and then there's racism, and I just feeling as an American, you know, how America as a whole kind of defines racism. It's like, it's that power that makes it racism. It's like, as you were saying, your experience, and I'm so sorry that happened for you. These stories are terrible. I'm sorry that happened to you at such an early age, and in general, but you felt powerless in that situation. And I feel like that's, to me, more of a definition of racism is where you're being discriminated against because the color of your skin, and there's a certain power associated with that. Because if somebody says to me, you know, you're ugly or whatever, and they have no power over me, that doesn't affect me, you know? Whether they're white or Black, whatever, if it doesn't affect me, I just don't consider it, you know, racism. You know, I don't know if you know what I'm saying, but I feel like it's that power is definitely attached as even.
I see it as lack of power. I see it as, because I don't want to give power to the people who are being racist.
Right.
You know? They don't have power over me, but it was my lack of power in those moments that allowed this thing to happen. And allow might be the wrong word, but, you know, after each instance, I got saved in some way. And, you know, the first one with the kids on the playground dropping the rock on my head, like the whole neighborhood came out. And his father said he was grounded for life, you know? And, I mean, it was just like this whole community discussion that was horrible to watch as a kid, but I also felt like, okay, at least I'm getting stood up for, you know? And then with the Black girls on the playground at the school, which was outside of Washington, D.C., it was in Laurel, Maryland, that girl, you know, my father sticking up for me was huge, because it was like I kind of took my power back. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't feel that lack of power anymore. But then when I went to the next school, which was in middle school, fast forward, because that was elementary. So middle school, you know, my first day there, I got called a honky. I went home and I'm like, Dad, what does this mean? And he's like, that's just a really derogatory word, and I don't want anyone ever calling you that again. That's not okay. You can't stand for that, you know? And then I had, you know, other instances where people would try to set me up because I was the new girl and say, I told somebody they look like a monkey. And it was totally a lie. And I'm like, why would you say that? And so there was like, it wasn't that it was subtle, but it was just very manipulative. It was very conniving. It was very behind my back kind of stuff happening. And once I got a hold of it, I took my power back, you know? So even as a white privileged person, you lose power every now and then. And I'm not saying everybody does. I'm not saying this is the norm either, because I don't think that this is normal for most white people. I think most white people are completely oblivious to this. And they just go along, living their little lives, you know, like everything's peachy keen. But there's a whole world of racism out there that they're just now waking up to. And I think it's the novelness of a white person coming on and going viral that is what's making it so popular. I don't know if it's because that woman was white. It might just be because it was a novel thing for a white person to do it.
Just thinking about what Tamara was saying, that like by hook or by crook or however it's happening, it's good that it is happening. And I think if for 400 years we have not been listened to and people have not paid attention or changed, and we've been, as Christopher was saying, shot and assaulted and executed and murdered for saying things that were true. If it finally takes a white person to say to change the structure, then I think they need to get off their asses and say it. I've been asked for a number of interviews for the past week for different orchestras or news outlets saying, well, we want you to talk, we want you to say this, we want you to say this. And I'm just like, no, like, let's have let the white CEOs talk to the white CEOs and let them have that positive peer pressure. And it would be great if we were being listened to. And we should continue to talk and scream and yell and chat and protest. But the allies' voices need to be really strong at this point, because we're in the United States, it's like 10% of the population. I don't know the exact number, but it's much less, right? So what is really fatiguing to me is people coming to me and saying, and with good hearts, and they want to know, and they, okay, I get it. But like, well, what should we do? What can we do? It's like, well, it's been 400 years you can study, or like your lifetime, and just Google a couple of things to figure it out. And it's not a question of like, what are you going to do now to look really good on media or social media? But 3 months from now, August 25th is a 3-month anniversary. Then November 25th is the 6th month. And then February 25th is a 9-month anniversary. 9 months to birth a child. 9 months from now, what will you do looking back? What will you have brought to fruition or brought to your life on February 25th when you look back retroactively? So for all the allies that are memes are flying and internet is ablaze, February 25th, 9 months anniversary. What will you have actually done systemically as an ally, as a white ally? How will you have raised your voice and changed the organization of the small circle that you're in? I think that's like the really, really important part.
With myself, the only reason I had the time to get back into this podcast with the Collective Perspective was because of the quarantine. When my acting work is back to full time, I will not have time to do this. The only thing I have going for me is that I tend to attract projects, and I'm attracted to projects that highlight social justice. So my work is kind of part of that, but I don't know. And I do feel like I'm failing the movement in a couple ways. I feel like I'm failing the movement right now because I'm not protesting on the streets, which is where I truly feel that I belong. But I have certain vehicles that seem to be more, they seem to be better for me for what I'm trying to do. I don't know. I'm a little disheartened by my own situation and what I'm allowing to be my situation. But what were your thoughts there, Daniel?
Just very briefly, I wrote an article for Orchestras Canada called "The Perfect Fifth of Diversity," talking about ways that people can evaluate diversity in their own realm. So I would disagree with the notion that the fact that you cannot do this podcast means you're necessarily out of the battle for a number of reasons. Looking at orchestras and like that, performing arts, I guess. I highlighted a couple of different areas. First off, who's performing? Who's on stage? So who are you putting on stage? Secondly, who is being performed? Which artists, which directors, which composers, which writers are part of the focus? Who's attending or who's listening? So who's in the audience? And then fourthly, who's deciding? Who's making choices? Who has the seats of power? And then fifthly, how are we relating to each other as all of this is being done? So who's performing, who's being performed, who's listening, who's making the decisions, and how are we treating each other as we do that? And if we look at in our respective spheres after we get off this podcast, I believe whatever spheres in which we have power, whether it's a family, whether it's a single mother, a single father taking care of kids and bringing in resources and thinking about how they educate those children, or us in positions of power as we choose artists to highlight, to perform, as we open the doors to audiences, as we make accommodations for different audiences, different parts of the public that otherwise might not be able to come, we have influence, we have spheres of power. And that is where the battle needs to be fought, in those different areas. That's what I would say. So I think that even if once you get off this podcast, this will be an artifact that can last. But I think as we retire to our respective areas, there's tons that we can do. And we just need, like Esther Perel says, like imagination about how we can take the space and create the space and make sure that there's no return to invisibility, especially on the part of allies. Allies making the space and opening up the doors.
The question is, do allies want to do it because they really are allies, or do they want to do it because that's the trend going on right now?
But protests are very important, and public displays of your frustration and your anguish are very important. But there comes a time where you have to leave the protest and you have to go back home, and you have to go back into the community, and you have to go back to the film shooting, you have to go back to your job. So just because you're not able to do a podcast publicly doesn't mean that you're not still able to assist with this issue or be a part of the change. Because if really the things that we do when we're home and when we're in private and when we're in small groups are just as important, if not more important, than what we do in a public forum. So you could be on a film set and you can see something that doesn't look right, and you can speak up about it. You can share some education, with someone, or you can have a discussion on the side. So I think that you will continue going because you have a passion for, you've been an activist and you get in the community and you really care about issues like this. So I think you and all of us will continue and can continue to do things, even if it's in a private sense or on a smaller scale. So I just wanted to say that, so because it seemed like you were a little bit discouraged and you were thinking like, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this. And you don't know which way your life is going to turn or what opportunities will happen and how you can do it on a smaller scale. So that's all I wanted to say.
No, I really appreciate that. And I really, personally, I need to hear stuff like that because I forget. I've already lost fans. There were people that were following me that would send me message on Instagram that were really appreciating my acting work. They don't follow me anymore since I started posting this stuff. And so I'm allowing this to affect my career, but this is more important than my career. And I feel like the change that's happening, this paradigm shift, I want to help this shift continue. And I feel like my career as an actor will have a place in that new paradigm. And if we don't have that new paradigm, if we're still in a good old boy network, maybe I don't want to be an actor in that world. Maybe I'm better served doing other things. Is anybody else having concerns about that? About how what's going on now and your stance that you're taking is going to affect your career? Because as an addendum to that, we have a lot of Black people here who you've all had these conversations with each other and with your allies, but you've not necessarily had them openly. And so you have to worry about, we know that there are police officers right now that are aware because of your Twitter accounts or your Instagrams or whatever, that you support Black Lives Matter or you support defunding the police. This is absolutely clear based on the new leaks, blue leaks. They follow people based on their online accounts because they know whether they're friendly with the police or not.
As a Black person, I don't really have a choice in the matter. It's kind of like fighting for your life in a way. I also have kids, so I'm concerned about my children and their lives and my friends and family. So I don't really have that option to kind of, even if I did, I don't because of the color of my skin. And there's a lot of Black people, who think otherwise and have taken certain stance. But at the end of the day, at least living in America, the color of your skin can determine a lot. So I don't really have that choice.
I actually do think about that. And actually, I went to a protest about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and my kids were saying, no, Daddy, don't go out there. You're going to get hurt. Look at the TV. All of these people are getting locked up and stuff. And my youngest son started crying. And I'm like, well, what should I do? But I explained to him that I felt that was the right thing for me to do at that particular time. And if it wasn't, there's other ways that you can help the cause. You can donate money, you can start, sign petitions, and everybody's not called to protest or do certain things. But I felt at that moment it was. So I felt that it was more important for me to do it at that time than not to. Because I don't want 30 years to go by or however many time to go by. And then I'm saying, man, I wish I would have did something. I had an opportunity to do something, and now some things are even worse. Or I can't live with myself because I'm regretting not doing something.
I think another way of thinking of it is what are we patronizing? What are we putting our money and our effort and our focus on? And is that opening doors, or is that just opening doors to an exclusive group of people? Is it a privileged thinking? Is it creating more opportunities? Is it, I think it's the whole white patriarchal system, which comes from, colonialism from Europe, that has affected absolutely everyone. And the shift is a huge one, and it seems so insurmountable. But those little decisions that we make every day, like who are we promoting when we are on social media? Like Daniel was talking about, like on his Facebook, there was somebody who is saying to me, like, well, are you coming out to support the CPO? And I said, well, yeah, when it's the things that are really important to me, I spend my money on that. I don't spend my money on everything that's it's not something I can do with a child. There are limitations to what you can do, but I can open the doors for what I'm purchasing, the shows I'm watching, the people I'm following. Those types of things are important. And I think that this couple is in intersections very closely with the issues of feminism and gender inequality. All of this is all stemming from the same system of oppression. It's the same great big system. And it's possible to always be both oppressed and privileged in different ways. And certainly this is a massive topic, but that was how I've been looking at it. How can I teach my 4-year-old about different cultures and different races and different parts of the world and different traditions, and how those are the contributions I can make. And instead of thinking of how insurmountable it is, that's really the activism we make. We pay the money we pay for items, the money we pay for music, the money we pay for shows, the things we decide that we're going to focus our attention on and our intention on. And that's all we can do as individuals.
I think being a mother taught me that more than anything, because I constantly have mom guilt. It's a real thing. You never feel like you're doing enough. You always feel like you're spread too thin, or you could be doing a million other things for them that's better. But you really have to just focus on what you can do and do it to the best of your ability. And, I've got 3 kids, 2 jobs, and it's just insane. And so for me, this is my contribution. Writing my blog, that was a contribution. Just being there for my Black friends, like, that's a contribution. Teaching my 3 children, that's a contribution. So if I can focus on doing those things well, then I don't need to beat myself up.
Yes, do everything that you can, but sometimes more than just giving a pat on the back, if you see someone or hear something that is wrong, speak out on it to that person. People understand responsibility when their peers point things out, because Black people can scream from the rooftops that this is a problem and nothing's going to change.
It kind of reminds me of being on the subway in New York, and you see the signs that if you see something, say something, and that's about violence. And then I thought about that with regards to music and conducting. I was going to say to my conducting students, if you hear something, say something. As soon as you hear something wrong, or as soon as immediately you say something, okay, this sharp, flat, fats, whatever, fine. But it comes back again to, if you see something, say something to the allies. Don't just let it pass by. Totally.
I completely agree with you, the way you referenced that, but that is some fascist BS. Basically, as soon as you enter Penn Station or Grand Central, if you see something, say something. Basically, the whole thing, and in tandem with that, is have a safe day. First of all, telling somebody a computerized thing to have a nice day means nothing. Telling them computerized to have a safe day means nothing. But what it does do is reinforce that we should all be afraid of each other, but that the system is fine. Don't worry about the system, because what I see on a regular basis is our system effing us over all the time. I see that, but if I say something, what does that mean? So I don't know. I have a pretty strong feelings on that.
So you see that as like a very oppressive, actually. Like,
absolutely.
Right.
You should be afraid. Be afraid. Somebody's going to do something to you. So don't be afraid to run to mommy and daddy and let them know that you saw something. And mommy and daddy happen to be people in blue, or people who fund people in blue.
Right.
Hey,
Yeah, but I
Isaac.
think Daniel's point is that it's that he's referencing in it as if you see something, say something, not to go tell on something.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I know. But I was just, yeah. So
No, but that's absolutely part of it. And I have thinking one of my friends who would absolutely agree with your point. It's like, if you see something, say something to who, and what would I be seeing? So you could rightly ask that. What exactly should I be seeing? What should I be watching out for? So this actually gets into a slightly different part of the topic that I wanted to bring up, because I was born in Montreal, and I was raised in Calgary, and I was always the only I was always the only, in a room full of white people, always the only Black person in the room for most of my growing up, most of my years. Christopher, you said earlier that you expect racism from white people, right? I don't expect racism from white people, and with the way that I've grown up. This is part of my privilege. And I'm not alone. There was an article in the Globe and Mail recently, about 2 weeks ago, about a guy who says, I grew up in Scarborough along with white and Black people. A lot of the incidents of racism that he's encountered, he's been like, they were nothing to compare to what Black people in the United States have encountered, right? So it's interesting just seeing that, because when it's like, in my head, I'm not constitutionally afraid of police officers, and I've had very few negative interactions with police officers, except for 2 occasions, both of which occurred in the United States, right? Once crossing the border, where I got on a bus. I was on a bus with a band trip, and the officer walked all the way from the front of the bus to the back where I was sitting and said, "Show me your passport." And for like the next hour, as we drove, like I showed my passport, everything was fine. My teachers and my friends were freaking out. They're like, "This is crazy. How could that happen?" Another time when I was randomly stopped for no reason by a police officer, right? So it kind of makes sense, actually, Isaac, that you would look at that and think, "Oh, I'm going to tell a police officer." Oh, no, that's not like that's. But that actually makes sense, right? So one of the things that I've been speaking to people a little bit about, and some of my friends from Calgary, are the different experiences of Black people in different areas. Because thank God I haven't had some of the experiences that it's just unspeakable, like with police officers, like specifically, right? I haven't seen that. And sometimes I don't know what to do with that fact. And I feel like, am I just like saying stuff that I haven't experienced? And part of it's, well, I have experienced things, but like nothing compared to people in some parts of the state. So I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. But I appreciate what you said about see something, say something, because you actually are right. It's like, got to be careful who you're saying it to. So
Dan, that's your Canadian privilege, right? We have a privilege. You're right. There's Canadian privilege. And from growing up in Calgary, we had a very multicultural situation at school. It was always about multiculturalism, and it was always about sharing culture. And I had never really experienced that idea of isolated segregation in the schools. And that's my privilege from growing up here in a place that's very peaceful, and just by sheer luck, right? This is the sheer luck of it. But it doesn't mean, and like watching what's going on in the States and how that reverbs here in Canada is absolutely, they're absolutely linked. But it's also astounding to see the stark difference just in media reporting, the differences on how media is reported and how different these reports are. And also just in general, I think that's our Canadian privilege. It really is. I feel so super lucky that I have a media that is, mostly dependable and truthful and has given many different voices. And that's one of the things I loved about the CBC and how the CBC radio programs, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, they did all of this work for absolutely as many communities as possible to keep that multicultural, the multicultural ideas of what Canada is, like the mosaic it is. And that's I do believe part of what's helpful. Canada's racial issues are predominantly, though, within Indigenous populations. That's hugely disproportionate here. We don't, there are so many issues regardless, right? But
just on that, right? In the mid 1850s, I'm reading literature both like theological literature about slavery and then just popular literature from from 1850s. And often Canada is held up as a beacon of, we will get to Canada, things will be different when we get there. And that was, for Black people, that was largely true. But at the same time in Canada, in 1830s, that's when the first residential school opened. And if you were a young Aboriginal girl or boy, you'd be abducted from your parents and thrown into a school. And in some schools, the death rate was, around 45%. So we definitely have our issues. So I definitely feel that Canadian privilege. I'm interested in what I would like to know from a non-Canadian Black perspective, how you see people like myself. I'm just like, and honestly, like, how do you see somebody like myself who hasn't had some of those same experiences? What do you feel that I can do? What do you feel that I can say? How much can I speak? Talk to me. Teach me and I will be taught.
Well, first I will say that I am actually, like when I said earlier, I told you about the Native American Choctaw Sixikawa. I didn't go specifically in Sixikawa. It's actually the Canadian Sixikawa. My grandfather's family comes from, they're the Canadian Blackfoot, but they're part of the Canadian Blackfoot tribe that came down to America because of how bad the Canadian government or the Canadian people were treating the Native American Canada, the indigenous Canada. And like, I grew up in I would consider you say, in a fairly wealthy family myself. So I was too white for the Black people and not Black enough for the white people. You know what I mean? Not white enough for the white people. Yeah. You get what I'm saying? Tokenism.
Yeah, I think it's good that you asked that, and I think that the number one thing to do is to just try to educate yourself, talk to your American friends and us, and see what are some of the struggles we're having, and watch some Netflix documentaries, read some literature and things like that, and then. Since you seem to be an influential person, which everybody is, but some people have the opportunity to be able to speak to the masses. You said you've had opportunities to, maybe have interviews or something. Use that influence, because you don't have influence you have the influence for a reason, and to speak up about some of the things you witnessed when you came to the States, and some of the things that you've heard firsthand from people like us. And I think that could be helpful.
I'll be quoting you all.
Same here.
Yeah.